All right, everyone, I'm Brad Harris. Welcome to my home office. Today we have Steve Conaton, Senior HR Manager at a Fortune 50 company, to talk with us about analytics and specifically people analytics. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so analytics is a super hot topic in the HR space. When you think of people analytics, talent analytics, HR analytics, or whatever else we're going to call this thing, what does that really mean to you?
So when I hear people analytics or talent analytics or any of those things, I'm thinking of using kind of statistical tests and a little bit higher rigor to, with our people data in any organization, to understand and identify and hopefully solve different business problems. So when I think about it, I tend to go a step further than just kind of taking a pivot table and looking at the what's the average here? What's the, maximums and minimums? I'm talking more on the inferential statistics and, using some regressions and statistics tests to understand what are the really significant factors in the data with your people data. And then ideally taking those kind of significant factors and then moving them along to making some predictions about what might be true with similar populations in the future.
All right, cool. So you've got a pretty interesting story. Now, you and I overlapped a little bit when we were both at the School of Labor and Employment Relations at the University of Illinois. At that time, you've gotten a lot better at it since then, but at that time, you really weren't a heavy into stats or an analytics junkie by any means. But you've kind of taught yourself how to get into the space. How did that come about?
Yeah, so to be clear, I have no background in statistics at all. My undergrad major was music. So I was a teacher for a couple years. I worked in a psychiatric hospital. I worked with kids with autism. So when I got to grad school to get into an HR role, I literally had never done statistics. That was not in my repertoire. But it so happened that, I got a little bit of the basic training through the master's program. And then once I got into the professional setting, I had this really interesting experience where I worked in our talent acquisition organization. And I was just sitting on all of this data for, thousands and thousands of applicants. And I had a casual conversation at lunch, just randomly, with somebody who worked there who happened to be an industrial organizational psychologist. And I was talking about, man, I'm trying to figure out, what is it that makes some people accept our offers to work at this wonderful company? And what is it that makes other people turn down those offers and go somewhere else? And this IO psychologist said, oh, well, why don't you just run a logistic regression and see what pops? And I pretended like I knew what that meant. And I was like, yeah, that's a great idea for sure. And so then I went back to my desk and started Googling logistic regression. I'd never actually heard of that before. And basically got into kind of a deep hole of trying to understand, what is this process? How do I do a logistic regression? What would I need to do to the data? And from that kind of one business question of, what is it that impacts whether somebody says yes or no to an offer? I basically, work through just kind of Googling, teaching myself this kind of foundational how to do statistics, and then more importantly, how to use those statistics to help you actually solve the answers to those very hard to see questions.
All right, cool. Now, to be sure, we've talked about this in some detail. Just running data to see what pops can lead you to some dangerous conclusions. So I'm not hearing you say that's the best practice, but there's also a lot of logic involved into thinking about what variables make sense and what are appropriate.
Yes.
All right. So you once told me that the transition to being an analytics person has forever changed you and how you see the world. What do you mean by that?
So I would say when I say analytics has changed me, I mean, first and foremost, that it's made me just an incredibly skeptical person. I just don't believe anything that I hear anymore, particularly in the business setting. And what I mean by that is you will often hear people say things like, the reason that this is happening with our people is this, right? Or people are leaving the company because they don't get paid enough. They don't like this person. They have a bad manager, blah, 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 as an example, right? I don't believe the kind of assumption answers that are given unless I go in and I have a data set and I can start to run some analytics to actually see what are the statistically significant variables that might be impacting that. So I think the biggest way that it's changed me is it made me really, really, really think twice about everything that I hear is taken for granted. And to give you another example of that, in an organization, you have these people who get to leadership positions, and over the course of the years, they build up this, great experience. And so we tend to rely on our experience and say, I've encountered this before, I solved it this way, this is my go-to answer, right? That's great, except when it comes to talking about people data, obviously what might have been the case 20 years ago is not necessarily the case now. And there's a lot of variables that might be in that data. So when you do the analytics to actually go in and see, what is causing this, what are the different influencing factors, then you can kind of debunk the standard, well, this is my experience and I know best. When you come with the data and you can say, actually, I've run some regressions and it turns out that it might be this, it might be this, it might be this instead, that really tends to make people, stop and think twice and really reconsider what are their hypotheses.
Yeah, so I share a similar experience in my doctoral training of once you learn all this stuff and you have the ability to kind of test these hypotheses yourself, you go through this phase where nothing is true. What are the anchors on which I can build my life and all this stuff. And then eventually it becomes more of an empowering feeling where, now I know to ask questions and I actually know how to get at some better answers too. So I guess skepticism is good in a healthy amount, and I share your experience. So where you're at right now, what excites you most about using analytics to better manage people?
Yeah, I think that people management is an area where there's it's just primed for like a revolution in terms of using analytics to make better decisions, right? We're already doing this in a lot of other areas of the business, and people are using analytics to do better advertising buys and better sales decisions and pitches and things like that. We've taken it and we have no problem integrating it basically everywhere else in businesses, right? When it comes to people, we look at people and we say, well, they're very complicated. There's no way we can do anything with analytics, right? But in fact, of course, there's people data. There's all sorts of data on people that we can take in terms of the course of careers and performance and salaries and demographics and locations and all those kinds of things. And when we apply an analytics lens to that, it helps us get to some more interesting and more kind of rigorous conclusions about what are the elements that are, driving our organizations to do better, right? So to give you an example, we might assume that so-and-so is a great manager because, they've had 3 or 4 people who've turned out to be great leaders, right? Well, with an analytics approach, we can take so-and-so and we can take all the other people who might look like so-and-so, and we can run some statistics to see, are there some, other people who might show up as, wow, actually, here's all these people who have had similar, experiences, maybe not as visible, who are bringing people along, and those people are then subsequently going on to great things in our company. And then we can use those kind of important data points to make better decisions about how, for instance, we pair people who are coming up through the company with different managers and things like that. So a huge potential for making better business decisions with the people analytics approach to our data.
Okay, cool. So many business schools and similar programs, including the place where we met, the School of Labor and Employment Relations, are emphasizing analytics and other stats-based training. And they're applying it. So in the B school context, at least, this is really prominent. You mentioned it, marketing, supply chain, and of course, finance has a rich empirical history too. Why should students in programs like that make sure to also supplement their stats training with a people analytics focus?
Yeah, I think, so one of the things that really strikes me is you will hear a lot of businesses, this has almost become a cliche at this point, will say something along the lines of, our people are, the core of our business. Our employees are our growth engine. Our employees are our greatest asset. These are very, very common things in the business setting, right? And so I would take that kind of phrase and turn it on its head and say, okay, if we are comfortable using analytics for our supply chain and our marketing and our sales and our finance, because we think that's going to make better decisions, why wouldn't we also want to make better decisions in the space that we keep saying is our greatest asset and our most important element of the company, which is people, right? And the reality is there is people data in every company, in every organization. And so, it's not enough to just have the business acumen to say, hey, I can run a regression, I can, figure out the best way to do, XYZ marketing, you should also be taking that same approach and applying it to your people data, because that's, again, gonna get you to make better decisions for this great asset within your company. So I just think that's an incredibly important reason to continue building on your expertise and, become a better, more well-rounded kind of business professional as you come out of a program.
Yeah, really good insight there. And what's fun and challenging about people analytics is a lot of the things that we're talking about that motivate people and or we believe translate into results are really quite difficult to measure. Not always impossible, but they're usually they're kind of under the surface. So we have to be creative there. And then all these things are happening. People are getting tired of surveys and things like that. So we can't get reliable pulse data anymore. But you're also alluding to something about that reminds me of one of our colleagues' favorite topics, this idea of algorithm aversion, people being resistant to interpreting and using people data. Have you run up against that in your career?
Yeah, I think the important element there's an easy way to address that, because it does come up, right? When you tell people, hey, I've run this regression with all of our people and our employees, and I found out this important critical element that we need to act on if we want to improve our business outcomes. And somebody will say, whoa, all of our employees, how can we be sure that's true? Because every person is individual and every person is different, right? That is true. That is an actually true element. But what's really important here is, by running those different regressions and by having, most importantly, a hypothesis underneath that, right? That you've approached it with some logic, that you've said, okay, I'm not just, as you mentioned earlier, running a regression just to run a regression and say, hey, this is statistically significant, but you have a whole story that goes with that. So when you talk to leaders and say, I've taken our employee data, I've run this regression, I found out this important thing that we need to act on. The reason why I think this is a valid thing that we need to act on is because this other qualitative data that I can bring in, we have done interviews in the past, we have done focus groups in the past, we have heard this, and we know that because A plus B equals C, that this is very likely a true thing that we can act on. So again, I think the important element for making yourself credible is to be able to go into those kind of meetings, with the story, with the narrative, with something that actually holds true from A to C.
Okay, so all of these things that we're teaching on power, influence, leadership, critical thinking, all of these things are still valuable. I can still keep my job. Is that right?
I am saying, yes, you can keep your job, because again, you can do the best statistics and the most rigorous analysis in the world. But if you don't know how to talk about that analysis with the leader, if you don't know how to, make a very compelling presentation that is, highly visual and engaging and amplifies your message, then your leaders are going to say, I don't necessarily want to hear, what does this mean, right? And it's a very bad idea to go in and just throw a bunch of numbers on a screen and say, here's, the R squared, so you have to believe me and do what I say, right? Instead, you want to come with a story, and you want to have, that kind of understanding of how to influence people and how to come in, show up strong in that setting, that they can actually take you at your word. You can be a credible spokesperson for the data that is leading you to make a better decision.
All right. Well, thank you for handling the bonus questions there at the end. I appreciate you, Steve. Anything else you want to add for our audience, our students, before you leave?
I will say one more thing, which is, whenever you can come to a discussion about people in an organization with some statistical, analytical kind of foundation, and you can come and you can talk about the data shows XYZ because of this regression. If you use the word regression as an example, people will listen to you. People will perk their ears up, because frankly, it's not something that's super, super common when we talk about people in organizations. People analytics has not really hit the critical mass that a lot of our these other areas where we're regularly using statistics and analytics have. So if you are doing that, you are an early adopter, and you will kind of make a big name for yourself as you can come in with that level of additional analytical rigor.
All right. As always, Steve, you're super interesting. I appreciate your insight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.